In the decades right before the Civil War, America built a massive kingdom of cotton, and it was a source of unbelievable wealth and global power. But here's the thing. That kingdom was built on the move, and it was fueled by the forced migration of over 1 million enslaved people. So today, we're going to dig into the story of this domestic slave trade, a massive, brutal, and incredibly profitable relocation that literally reshaped the nation. So, where does a story like this even begin? Well, it starts with an ambition, a kind of fever, actually. In the early 1800s, something called Alabama fever started sweeping through the southern states. You see, the promise of cheap, fertile land out west was just this irresistible pull for white planters who were looking to make their fortunes. Let's take a real life example the Lead family from South Carolina. For years, they actually resisted that pull to go west. But eventually, even at 65 years old, the family patriarch, James Lead, packed up and moved his entire family, we're talking children, grandchildren, and all the people he enslaved, to a rough log cabin in Alabama. His son, Eli, would end up moving even farther, all the way to Texas, driven by that same feeling, that need to just push onward and onward. And, the line's personal ambition, that wasn't unique, not by a long shot. Their story was part of a colossal shift in society. From 1800 to 1860, this westward migration became the defining story of the South. And it was a story that was written with the sweat and muscle of over 1 million enslaved African Americans, forced to carve a brand new empire out of the wilderness. So, you have to ask yourself, what was really driving this massive movement? The answer, honestly, boils down to one single word: cotton. The economics of cotton created this brutal but very simple equation, and it was an equation that demanded a staggering human price. The sheer scale of this explosion is just mind-boggling. I mean, look at this. In 1820, the U.S. produced about 500,000 bales of cotton. Okay. By 1860, just 40 years later, that number had skyrocketed to 4 million. This wasn't just farming anymore. This was a full-blown industrial-scale enterprise that made the South's economy richer than most actual nations and supplied over two-thirds of the entire world's cotton. And those 4 million bales of cotton, they were fueled by human beings. Over 1 million enslaved people were forcibly moved from the Upper South down to this new cotton frontier. This was a mass migration on a scale that America had never, ever seen before. A traveler in Mississippi back in 1835, he kind of nailed the whole mindset perfectly. He saw it was this relentless, self-perpetuating cycle. You sell cotton to get money to buy more enslaved people, who you then force to make more cotton so you can buy even more people. Human beings were literally the capital that kept the whole engine running ad infinitum, on, forever. And the result of that cycle? A slave frontier that marched 900 miles in just 70 years. Now, this expansion wasn't just happening on its own. It was actively supported by the federal government, which was acquiring all this land through purchases and, of course, the forced removal of Native Americans, paving the way for the Cotton Kingdom to just keep growing. Okay, so we know the why. It's cotton. But what about the how? I mean, how did this transfer of over 1 million people actually work? Well, it wasn't random. It was a highly organized and, frankly, a shockingly efficient system. It was the business of buying and selling human beings. This migration really took two main forms. About 40% of people were transferred, so they moved west along with the planters who owned them, just like the Lyde family we talked about. But the majority, a full 60%, were sold. They were sold away from their homes, their communities, and their families through this huge network of professional slave traders. For those who were sold, the journey itself was a nightmare. It often began in something called a coffle. And I want you to just try and picture this. Columns of people, bound to each other, forced to march for hundreds of miles overland. Children were often thrown into wagons, while the adults were chained or tied together to stop them from escaping as they were marched toward the auction blocks of the Deep South. The contrast in how people saw this it's staggering. For the slave owners in states like Virginia or Maryland, selling people south was a huge source of income. It added about 20% to their earnings. But for the enslaved people themselves, being sold south was the ultimate threat. They looked at the Deep South with what one person called perfect horror. It was the worst punishment imaginable. And this really gets us to the true cost of this trade, a cost you could never measure in dollars or in bales of cotton. This was a devastating, deeply personal price that was paid by Black families.
To really understand this, you have to get one crucial idea. The entire system was built on the chattel principle. James W.C. Pennington, who managed to escape slavery, explained it perfectly. He said this was the soul of the institution, the idea that a person is legally just property, a thing, a commodity that can be bought and sold, listed on a bill of sale right next to livestock or furniture.
And the consequences of that principle were just catastrophic. Let this sink in. The domestic slave trade was directly responsible for destroying 1 out of every 4 marriages among the enslaved population. A quarter of all unions just torn apart by the market. Behind that statistic are countless stories of individual heartbreak. A man who was sold away from his family in Georgia wrote this letter. His spelling might be off, but his words, they capture a grief that is just almost impossible for us to comprehend today. And of course, the children were especially vulnerable. Nearly a third of all enslaved children under the age of 14 were separated from at least one parent because of a sale. The trade really focused on the young and the strong. And Anna Harris's memory of her sister Kate, it's such a simple, devastating summary of what it was like for so many. Gone, just, without a trace. And the separation was so often sudden and just traumatic. Vinnie Baker's memory from her childhood is absolutely chilling. For a child to go to sleep one night with their mother and wake up the next morning to find she has simply vanished, that was the terror that underpinned this whole system. But here's the incredible thing. The bonds of family were never truly broken. The story of Hawkins Wilson is such a powerful testament to this. He was sold as a child from Virginia all the way to Texas, and one of the very first things he did after he was freed, a quarter of a century later, was to start a desperate search for his sisters, Jane, Martha, and Matilda. He remembered their names all those years later. So all of this leaves us with a really difficult question. There's no doubt the Cotton Kingdom generated immense wealth. It propelled the United States onto the world stage, but it was built on a foundation of broken families, of immense suffering, and of turning human life into a commodity. And it really forces us to ask, what is the true price of a kingdom?